This is your point in the season where you need to start making decisions based off of playoff matchups here. And we're going through the top 12 defense rankings for fantasy football playoffs, and I'm the only fantasy YouTuber out there who covers defense multiple times a week because I understand the edge that it gives you in a fantasy game. So please go down there, drop a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. So our first defense right here, I've got the Vikings defense as the best playoff defense for the fantasy playoffs this year. Listen, with the Vikings defense, if you just look at them right now, they're outscoring the next best defense, which is the Denver Broncos, who is second on the year by 18 points, and they've also got a game on them. Denver hasn't had their bye week yet. Minnesota has already had their bye week. That's how aggressive and how good Minnesota's defense has been in fantasy. They have 30 sacks in this entire year. They've also got 15 interceptions. They've got 5 fumble recoveries and 6 forced fumbles. In total, we're looking at 20 total turnovers here. That's ridiculous. And 3 defensive touchdowns. Now, obviously, with the Minnesota Vikings, they've got a great defensive coordinator with Brian Flores. It's very sustainable. The personnel they have as well is already firing on all cylinders, and they're also pretty healthy as well, which is part of why I like them in the playoffs, but also because some of their matchups here, I think 2 in particular in the playoffs, weeks 15 through 17, versus Chicago, at Seattle, versus Green Bay. Now, obviously with Chicago, that is a great matchup. Chicago has been a disgrace. Out of their bye week, their offense cannot move the ball. They've become inept, and I expect the Vikings to take advantage of that 100% of the time. They're going to get after him with sacks, and I think the same thing could happen against the Seattle Seahawks. Geno Smith has been prone to interceptions this year, and they also can give up sacks as well. I expect those 2 games actually to be really good games, and then the Green Bay won a championship week. That's your toss-up right there. Now, at that point, you may feel more comfortable just sticking with the Vikings than you would go into a different defense. I might advise you to go a different defense that week, but obviously we'll have to see how things go for the rest of the year. But right now, the Vikings defense looks like a surefire top-notch defense for the fantasy playoffs this year. Number 2, the Bills defense. They have been awesome this year. They've been a little bit more streaky than the Vikings have been, obviously, but the Bills defense right now is the number 4 defense in fantasy. 88 total points, putting them only 2 points behind the Broncos at the number 2 defense here. Now, the Bills are not as aggressive getting after the quarterback. They've got 25 sacks this year, but what they've got, 11 interceptions and 11 forced fumbles. I mean, their defense is so aggressive. Of course, when you have Sean McDermott as the head coach, you're going to have a really good defense when you've got even some lagging personnel. Like Von Miller hasn't played the last several games. So imagine when they get their pass rusher back, when they've got all the other guys in the defense that are already performing really well and just hammered the Indianapolis Colts a couple days ago. Now, with the Bills defense here, they've got at Detroit versus New England versus the Jets. So you take out that Detroit game, they've got 2 elite matchups to end out the fantasy playoffs. So again, this is why I don't recommend just holding a defense and putting them in your do not auto lock a defense into your lineup because of games like Detroit. In your first week of the playoffs, that could be the guy that knocks you out of the playoffs. So you want to be strategic with this one because those 2 matchups at the end, New England and New York, both of them at home, are elite matchups in fantasy football. That's why the Bills are at number 2 and the Broncos at number 3. The Broncos at number 3, obviously, like I've been saying this whole video, it seems like inadvertently, Broncos are the number 2 defense right now in fantasy. They've been pretty awesome in fantasy football. They're very aggressive getting after the quarterback. 35 total sacks this year. They've got 7 total interceptions, and they've also got 6 forced fumbles. So they're really, really physical getting to your quarterback, and then they also do make interceptions and turnovers happen. Not to the level that the Bills and the Vikings have done, but they're still getting the splash plays that we need from a fantasy defense here. They've also had a really good schedule up to this point, and it starts to get a little bit tougher here, but I still do like some opportunities. I'm going to tell you why. So the Broncos in their playoffs versus Indy, at Los Angeles Chargers, and at Cincy. So with Indianapolis, obviously, whether they choose to stick with Anthony Richardson or Joe Flacco, whoever they face during that time, that's an opportunity right there. The Indianapolis Colts have one of the lowest turnover differentials in the entire league. They've been absolutely abysmal as far as playing clean football goes. That's a good matchup. At Los Angeles, possibly not the best matchup. There's 2 sides to this coin. On one hand, Los Angeles does not turn the ball over, so that doesn't create many opportunities for a lot of splash plays in fantasy. On the other hand, they don't score many points, so it might end up being a decent matchup because they just prevent them from getting too many points. And then at Cincy, that's a team that can turn the ball over, but they can also put wild points on you. Now, if Jamar Chase is locked down by Pat Surtain for the majority of that game, the Broncos might end up being a really good play. Ultimately, it just comes down to a belief that what I've seen from the Broncos defense this year is not a fluke. This defense is for real. They're getting after quarterbacks, and I expect them to do more of the same come fantasy football playoff time. Dropping down to our next tier right here, we've got the Cardinals defense at number 4. I don't know how many times I need to say this. Over the last several weeks, I've been kind of hammering this home, and I hope you take it seriously. The Cardinals defense is legit. Like, this is not a slouch defense right here. They've had 2 straight good games in fantasy, and looking at their schedule right here, versus New England, at Carolina, at Los Angeles Rams, again, you're front-loaded 2 great matchups right there. New England's looked better offensively. They're still not putting up many points, and they're also turning the ball over, and they can't protect Drake May. So it's not going to be a good day for the New England Patriots. The Cardinals defense also, their defense, again, very, very underestimated. Their defense only has 24 sacks on the year so far, but over the last several games, they've been really ramping that number up. They've been getting after the quarterback more, and they're also getting more interceptions and total turnovers as well. So the Cardinals defense, specifically over the last 3 or 4 weeks or something like that, they've been fantastic in fantasy. Then you go to Carolina. Obviously, Carolina is an abysmal team. Most of the time, that's a great matchup right there. They're going to turn the ball over. They're going to give sacks up to Bryce Young. It's a great opportunity. And then at Los Angeles Rams, not a great matchup, but what I will say is this. The first time that they played the Los Angeles Rams, they were a fantastic defense that week. That was the only time they played him, and it's a divisional matchup, and divisional matchups are always different when it comes to defenses and fantasy kickers in specific. I really think the Cardinals defense has been slept on for weeks now. I've been trying to wake people up to this one. I hope this does the trick right here. The Chargers defense at number 5. I think the Chargers defense is very similar to the Broncos, just a little bit lower end maybe. They've been a great defense as well in fantasy football. The Chargers defense has 31 total sacks, just not getting as many splash plays, 9 interceptions, 6 forced fumbles, but again, pretty comparable numbers to the Denver Broncos here. Now, the Chargers have also had the fortunes of the Denver Broncos when it comes to their schedule so far. And looking at their playoff schedule, they've got, again, beatable matchups here. And versus Tampa Bay the first week of the playoffs, I don't think that's as bad as it sounds. Obviously, Tampa can put up points, and by that time, they'll have Mike Evans back. But what we've seen from Baker this year is his interception ability. Like, it's not gone away. He still is prone to making turnovers like that happen. So I don't view this as like a negative matchup per se, just because the Chargers defense is so strong and good at getting after the quarterback and causing some turnovers. Then you've got Denver at home. Like I said, toss-up matchup. Denver can turn the ball over, so it definitely is not the worst matchup, but it's maybe not the best matchup just because it's a divisional game and Denver has looked a little bit better offensively. And then at New England, a great way to end it. That is your fantasy championship game, arguably the top fantasy championship game. So the Chargers defense, I love them as well. And then the Rams defense at number 6. To round out this tier with the Rams defense, also been saying this, I think people have started to wake up to it because I've been really loud about this. The Rams defense is really good. They're getting better and better and better every single week. They've got 2 vicious pass rushers who are getting after teams right now. The Rams defense has done really good work over the past month or so. They're getting after the quarterback more. They're getting more turnovers here. And the Rams defense, listen, New York and Arizona, those two at the final 2 weeks of the playoffs. Obviously, New York's going to be a fantastic matchup, but with Arizona, obviously, like I said earlier, Arizona did really well first time versus the Rams. What you could see here is that they're a hot and cold offense. They've been a hot and cold offense all year. So I don't rule that out as being some potentially really good matchup. Then you've got San Francisco at that first one. Again, maybe not as bad as it sounds. San Fran does turn the ball over sometimes, and sometimes they're not scoring as many points because a lot of their playmakers have just been injured this year. So Rams defense, I just like the trajectory that they're on. I think they're a young defense that's evolving, and that's what makes me really ultimately like them. Come fantasy playoff time, when a lot of these defenses who have older players, they're going to be really wearing down by that time, but the Rams defense with all their young talent, I think they're going to be ascending and peaking potentially at the right time in fantasy playoffs. Listen, Aaron Rodgers is an old dude. He's obviously washed up, but he's not washed up enough to not hit a total of 0.5 total yards next week, which is exactly what his projection is on Underdog right now. So you hit the higher on this one on Underdog, you're basically walking away with free money. So if you want to get in on this one right here, go down in the comments, grab the link that's there, and use code FVN to sign up for Underdog. When you hit the higher on this sweat-free projection for Aaron Rodgers this week, they will match your first deposit 50% up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Dropping out to our next tier right here, we've got the Packers defense at number 7 here. Listen, with the Packers defense, they've also been a really good defense the majority of the year. Their past 2 games, they haven't done particularly well, and then they obviously just had the bye week. So it's kind of easy to forget about the Packers considering their last 2 games were against Detroit, Jacksonville, and actually against Houston wasn't a particularly good game either. So obviously there was some matchups there, potentially against Houston and Jacksonville, that they should have taken advantage of. But the majority of the year, the Packers defense has been really good against really good opponents, by the way. So what I like about the Packers defense here is that they're still aggressive getting after the ball. They still have 10 total interceptions. They've got 9 total fumble recoveries. That defense is opportunistic. They may not be the most, they don't put the clamps on everybody, but they do get the big plays that we need in fantasy football. And again, these matchups here, we've got a really good one right in the middle after the Seattle Seahawks, which also, again, I believe is a good matchup because of Geno's turnover ability. Then you've got New Orleans. I think that's a great matchup. Obviously, they should hold them to a few points, potentially get some turnovers out of that one. And then you've got Minnesota in that championship week. Maybe not the best matchup. You may not feel comfortable doing that one. I do think Minnesota's beatable. We just saw Sam Darnold toss tons of interceptions towards Jacksonville's defense. I think the Packers can do well in the fantasy playoffs. And then I've got the Eagles defense at number 8. With the Eagles defense, that defense, I'll tell you this, they were horrific to start out the year. They were an embarrassment to start out the year. Would you believe you if I told you Philadelphia's defense after week 10 is the number 10 defense in fantasy? They've improved so much over the last month or so. They've got young players at key positions in the back end that are really coming into their own. So with Philadelphia, I really do like what we've seen because we've been seeing very consistent amount of sacks the last month. We've been seeing a very consistent amount of turnovers the last month, which is what they really struggled with in the first month of the season. We've seen a bunch of that stuff over the last month, and I think the Eagles defense here, they've got beatable matchups. Again, versus Pittsburgh, hit or miss, they look much better offensively than I thought they would, so maybe not the best game. At Washington, again, hit or miss matchup right here. Divisional game, I do think the Eagles do have a good chance of putting a whooping on the Washington Commanders by that time because they just have a much better roster than the Commanders do. And then you've got Dallas in that championship game. That's what puts them realistically at number 8 here. That strong of a championship matchup, that's going to win championships that week. That will win championships that week. So with the Eagles defense here, listen, they may not be the best defense on this list, but they've got the best championship matchup, arguably, and their defense is an improving one. I like them at 8. The Colts defense at 9. You know, with the Colts defense, I remember doing my rest of season defense rankings video about a month ago and putting the Colts defense in here, and it was met with some pushback. Let's just call it pushback because the Colts defense up to that point hadn't been very good in fantasy. Their defense in fantasy has rebounded. They've actually played some really good games in unexpected moments, mind you. They're the number 14 defense on the year right now. Now, again, their defense, it's not like they're getting tons of sacks. They only have 22 on the year, but they are getting turnovers. 8 interceptions, 11 forced fumbles total. So they are making things happen and getting those big plays in. That's why they were able to have a good game against the Minnesota Vikings, even though they lost to them. They're able to get big plays for you. And then when we're looking at these last several matchups, this is arguably the best playoff schedule of all. At Denver versus Tennessee, at New York Giants. I don't need to talk about the last two. You understand the value that those two offenses bring a defense in fantasy. Again, with Denver here, I think it's definitely worth noting that Denver doesn't put up tons of points, and they do turn the ball over sometimes. This may be the best schedule for defense in the fantasy playoffs this year. I've got to have the Colts inside the top 10. And then the Lions defense surround this tier out. The Lions defense has been excellent. Excellent over the last month. They have been an absolute force to be reckoned with. They have been ridiculously good. With the Lions defense, you'd think you'd lose Aiden Hutchinson and you'd not get out to the quarterback as much. They've actually been averaging a good amount of sacks per game since they lost Aiden Hutchinson. They've got 13 interceptions on the back end. That defense is playing so physical, so aggressive, so opportunistic. They're taking chances. Everything I want in a defense right here. Now their matchups, potentially not the greatest. Buffalo is going to be a tough one. Potentially, maybe have some turnovers in there, get after Josh Allen a couple times. But overall, I think Buffalo is going to put up points on them. At Chicago, excellent matchup. Chicago's offense sucks. And then you've got at San Francisco last week. So obviously that championship matchup is hit or miss. But what I said earlier with the 49ers offense is that sometimes they do turn the ball over and they don't score as many points. So there is opportunities opened up here. But just with the way the Lions defense has played over the last month, they've made so many strides defensively. I think they're just kind of bum rushing every team they play. And nobody's really knowing what to expect from their defense. Their defense is elite, and I expect them to be a great defense for the rest of the season and a good playoff defense as well. Dropping down to our last two. The Falcons defense at 11 and the Bucs defense at 12. Now, obviously, these two in particular, they're going to take some stones. That's why they're clearly in their own bottom tier here. They're going to take stones to play. But again, let's run through the most important thing, which is why these two are on here, matchups. Falcons defense at Las Vegas Raiders versus New York at Washington. With the exception of that championship game, I can't ignore these two matchups. Like these two matchups, New York and the Las Vegas Raiders, very, very beatable for the Falcons defense. Their defense has 9 sacks this year, though. That is an abysmal number, but they do have 7 interceptions and 6 forced fumbles. So they're just not getting after the quarterback, but they have the personnel on the back end to cause some havoc as well. Worth noting there. And then with the Bucs defense, obviously their defense is very good as well. The Bucs defense is taking on the Chargers in week 15, Dallas Cowboys week 16, and the Carolina Panthers championship week. So again, those last two matchups right there, very, very strong matchups. And then with the Chargers here, could be a coin flip. Did the Chargers score a lot that day, or did they not score much? Either way, they're not going to get many turnovers. But the one thing with Tampa that is interesting to note, 28 total sacks. They get after your quarterback right here. So with the Dallas game and the Carolina game in particular, even if they don't look the greatest on defense, they will be able to put up points because they can get after a quarterback. So let me know how your team looks so far this year. If you want to see the rest of season wide receiver rankings in 2024, click on this video right here.